The 5 most common mistakes preachers make, number 2. The second most common mistake is where the close is not connected to the sermon. Now, it goes without saying, for those of us who are in the African American preaching tradition, that there is a tremendous amount of pressure in the African American preaching tradition to close the sermon strong. In the African American preaching tradition, you can have a really good sermon and a weak close, and it will cancel out and people will call it a weak sermon. You could have a weak sermon and a great close, and people will talk about the close and they'll say a great sermon. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure to have a strong celebratory close. The common mistake that's made is that the close or the celebration of the sermon is disconnected from the sermon and then has the effect of erasing the sermon. In other words, the sermon is what you teach the people. And so the function of celebration is to joyfully and ecstatically reinforce what you've already taught the people. But to have a strong close, we will often get a story that has nothing to do with the sermon, doesn't reinforce the theme of the sermon, but it's a great close and it's a great story and people will cry and people will emote. But if the story is not connected to the sermon, it erases what you taught the people. Remember, celebration is to joyfully and ecstatically reinforce what you've already taught the people. The most common mistake, number 2, is preachers will have a celebration that erases what they taught the people. Therefore, the people are left with a tremendous amount of emotion at the end of the sermon. And then we do things like, "Whoa, she was really good. She really, really preached." And somebody said, "Well, what did she preach?" And they can't tell you because the emotional experience at the end of the sermon had the effect of erasing what you already taught the people. But when you connect the celebration with what you've taught the people, and the celebration joyfully and ecstatically reinforces what you already taught the people, then what you taught the people goes deep into their hearts. They receive the message with great joy, and you've reinforced it with joy, and the message will stick. Be careful. This is a great temptation in African American preaching, to have a close that's dynamic, but it erases what you taught the people. Now, you be well. Make sure you joyfully and ecstatically reinforce what you taught the people, and the people will be blessed, and so will you.